News.
News Talk KVNU.
The information from the Pretty Balanced Perspective.
Online at kvnutalk.com and on the KVNU mobile app.
KVNU News Time is 5:05. I'm Bill Walter with this news update brought to you by Northern Steel Buildings. In one of their first actions of the new year, the members of the Logan Municipal Council approved a resolution appropriating more than $6.7 million in anticipated surcharge revenue to cover increased power expenses through March in the city's Power and Light Department. Mayor Holly Dane said both residential and commercial customers have already seen surcharges on their power bills because costs have gone up significantly. Given the law of supply and demand, the cost for power will continue to rise for everyone. The mayor went on at length to explain the perfect storm of factors influencing rising power costs in the western U.S. during her annual State of the City address Tuesday night. She said those factors include a decrease in the supply of baseload power, cutbacks to long-term power purchase agreements, increased demand, and the transition to cleaner power sources. Dane said for the past 20 years, power rates have been relatively stable. That is changing dramatically for a number of reasons. She listed those reasons as a significant increase in the demand for power with population and business growth, a large increase in the number of electric vehicles, and many newly constructed all-electric housing units. Daines added that meanwhile, the city's long-term contracts to purchase power at favorable rates have been cut way back. KVNU News Time is 5:06. KVNU weather for tonight. Snow in the forecast. Could see up to a couple of inches. Low in the upper 20s. Snow likely Friday morning. Chance of snow in the afternoon tomorrow. Another inch accumulation. And then partly sunny and upper 30s on Saturday. There is a winter storm warning in effect for the mountains from now until 2 o'clock on Friday. It's been to 31. It's 28 right now at KVNU. KVNU weather brought to you by Mount Logan Laundry. They have 55 and 80-pound washers to make your stay much shorter. Located in Logan and Brigham City.
In the beginning of time, in a land far away, hid a material in the earth so versatile that once discovered would give way to a century of innovation. From primitive weapons to railroads to buildings that scrape the skies.
What is it? Steel. And without it, our world would look much different. Nothing is stronger or more versatile than steel. And if you want a building that'll stand the test of time, call Northern Steel Buildings at 435-677-7300 or visit northernsteelbuilding.com. That's northernsteelbuilding.com.
KVNU News Time is 5:08. 8 people were found dead inside an Iron County home on Wednesday. Police were called to the area near 4900 North and Albert Drive in Enoch in reference to a welfare check. When officers arrived, they checked inside the residence and found 3 adults and 5 minors deceased. Each appeared to have sustained gunshot wounds. City Manager Rob Dotson said the family, who has not been publicly identified, are well known through the community.
It's hard to describe in words the emotions that are going through the people who live here. We all know this family. Many of us have served with them in church, in community, and gone to school with these individuals.
During a Thursday press conference, it was announced that a 42-year-old man who was associated with the family shot his 5 children, his mother-in-law, and his wife, then killed himself 2 weeks after the woman had filed for divorce, according to authorities and public records. And Senator Karen Main, Democrat from West Valley City, will step down from her seat one day before the start of the legislative session. The Utah Senate announced that on Wednesday. Main, who has served in the legislature since 2008 and was most recently Senate Minority Leader, is resigning due to health reasons. Main has been battling cancer since early last year. In her resignation letter, Maine said her health took an unexpected turn since she was reelected to the seat in November, and she decided it was best to resign. In a statement, Utah Senate President Stuart Adams called Maine a dear friend who handled her health challenges with grace and tact. Senator Luz Escamilla, Democrat from Salt Lake City, who was recently elected Senate Minority Leader for the upcoming session, said Maine has made a difference for families, workers, and veterans. KVNU News Time is 5:10. For more details on these and other stories, visit CacheValleyDaily.com.
Stay informed, stay connected. News Talk KVNU, 610 AM, 102.1 FM, and online at 610kvnu.com.
Hi, this is Gordon Deal. Friday on This Morning, America's First News, tracking the latest from Capitol Hill as Republicans battle over the Speaker of the House, plus reasons why the House GOP is unorganized. Also, are American automakers only making cars for the rich? Hear the new strategy being implemented in the wake of the pandemic. And who can manage a workout in the middle of the work day? Friday on This Morning, America's First News. From 4 to 6 on News Talk KVNU, 610 AM and 102 FM. Your station for news and talk.
Hey, Joe, I thought you were retired.
Living on a fixed income is tough. So here I am, an essential worker.
I know. I mean, food prices are going up every day. Thank goodness for benefitscheckup.org.
Benefits what?
benefitscheckup.org. It's a free website where people over 60 can find help to pay for food, medicine, even utilities. I got $1,200 a year in benefits. Maybe it can help you.
I spent a lot of time in the garage, but even more time in the rain and mud. In '95, I helped tow your moving trailer. And in '09, it was sparks from me, your chains, dragging behind your truck that accidentally started a wildfire.
Spark a change, not a wildfire. Visit SmokeyBear.com, brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
Welcome back to KVNU's For the People. Coming up this hour 2 of today's show, Thursday, January 5th. We will get to a lot of things, but a lot of it is very fluid right now. A press conference taking place at the Capitol right now where leadership of the legislature are announcing their priorities. To put this another way, they're listing the bills that will pass. That is still playing out, so we'll give that another few minutes before we give you a recap of that. They're still listing things that, might still be a part of the upcoming legislative session. And again, when leadership says it's a priority, that's a signal to the rest of the House and the Senate that this is important and this will pass. Great Salt Lake getting a lot of mentions as well, and our own Representative Casey Snyder is a part of this, bringing the Let's Think About Agriculture aspect of the Save Water for the Lake debate as well. So interesting, he was invited to be a part of this. We'll talk about it all as it wraps, after it wraps, which should be in the next few minutes. So we'll get things started here this hour with our attempt to bring the temperature down a little bit in our news consumption, while at the same time bringing you news. It's time for your headlines with smooth jazz. This day in history, normally I pick one thing from history in which, an anniversary or something like that is occurring for the this day in history entry to the headlines each day. But today you get 4, because all 4 that I ran across were from the Smithsonian and history.com were pretty interesting. So, Bill, you might remember this. I kind of do. This was the day, the first ever episode in 1959.
I wasn't around then.
Of the Bozo the Clown show.
But I do remember Bozo the Clown.
It ran for quite some time, didn't it?
Yeah, I think now that's the show. It originated, I think, on It started on WGN in Chicago as just a local show.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
And then went syndicated.
Yeah, it was, and it ran for at least 10 years, I think. But Bozo the Clown Show premiered the first episode this day in 1959. Also on this day in 1933, headed back further, in 1933, the first construction began on the Golden Gate Bridge in the San Francisco Bay. This day in 1933, construction workers rolled up in their trucks and with shovels began digging. The first thing they built was a place to put all of their tool sheds and even some housing for workers that were going to be brought in, migrants and more. That was this day in 1933. Going back even further, a very famous event. This day in 1920, the Boston Red Sox sold Babe Ruth. It was a shocker announcement. He was sold to the New York Yankees, and this is where also we get the origins of the Bambino curse, which is referenced as also beginning in this day. The day it was the sale of Babe Ruth to the New York Yankees by the Red Sox was announced. And finally, flashing back to more current times for this day in history. Again, multiple entries today because they all seemed interesting to me. In 1972, NASA announced the development of the space shuttle on this day in history. And the space shuttle, of course, went on to be one of their longest running and, despite a couple of tragedies, their most successful, lengthy program. So, in Washington, D.C., as we speak, the 11th round of voting. Again, it's been more than 100 years since it took more than one. But the 11th round of voting for the Republican Speaker of the House is underway as we speak. It kicked off about 15 minutes ago, and there was a kind of big surprise, although it won't go anywhere. But it was a surprise of Representative Matt Gaetz. He announced that he was nominating former President Donald Trump for Speaker. This won't get any support, but it does speak to what's going on. And if you are a longtime internet user, you might be familiar with the phrase trolling. It's pretty apparent at this point that about 20 House Republicans are just trolling their own leadership, making increasingly ridiculous demands. And even when those demands are agreed to by Kevin McCarthy, they then don't vote for him anyway. Speaking of this, Congressman Chris Stewart jumping into the comment fray on all of this. Yesterday, we aired a clip of Representative Blake Moore from here in the 1st District talking to CNN on Monday night saying, look, I think everybody will come around. This is a bit of theater from these 20 Republicans that want to raise their own profiles, and then it'll settle down and everyone coalesce around a consensus candidate, likely McCarthy, who Moore has voted for. Every single representative of Utah's congressional delegation, by the way, has voted for McCarthy every time. And today, Congressman Chris Stewart from Utah's 2nd Congressional District spoke to Fox 13 and pulled no punches. He said what these 20 Republicans are doing is unproductive, pointless, and in the end, ultimately embarrassing. He said that it will possibly tarnish Republicans' chances in some competitive districts in the 2024 election, where members of Congress are up for re-election again. And he said it's going nowhere. They have 20 votes. Kevin McCarthy has 203. They're calling for him to back down and withdraw. It's time for them to back down and withdraw. That was a comment made to Fox 13 earlier today by Congressman Chris Stewart of Utah's 2nd Congressional District. The New York Times did some digging, and it's an interesting read, a lengthy read, but trying to answer the question, when it comes to Russia's invasion of Ukraine, still ongoing, nearing its one-year anniversary soon, the question was, how did this supposedly large, well-moneyed, and high-tech military fail at, regardless of what the world thinks of their goal, which the world should think their goal is frightening and wrong, But regardless of that, setting that aside, how did they fail at their goal? Their goal was to invade and assimilate into Russia proper, the area of Ukraine. And they haven't been able to do so as we near the one-year anniversary. The New York Times wanted an answer to that, so they started doing some digging. The story itself is lengthy and very interesting and worth a read. I've linked to it on our Facebook page, but some short highlights from the opening of that investigative research. Russia got cocky, and they didn't expect the resistance they got, and what that led to, the New York Times reports, is losing most of their highest trained special forces in the first 100 days of the war campaign, leaving them strapped. By May of 2022, they were recruiting in prisons in Russia because, well, they had run short. All of this speaks to a potential future, which is not going anywhere good for Russia. Which begs the question, which has been the question forever, what happens next? Well, I don't know. The article itself sheds a lot of light on what went wrong for Russia, thankfully, and I've linked to it on our Facebook page. And we'll wrap up our headlines and smooth jazz segment here with something from Bill. Bill, you have an update?
Yeah,
on the Bozo the Clown.
Did a little research.
History entry.
Little Bozo research here.
Again, for listeners, if you're just tuning in, today, this day in history, the Bozo the Clown show premiered in 1959.
And I thought Bozo belonged to Chicago, was Chicago's official clown, and was on TV there. And he was, and that's probably the most enduring franchise of Bozo, but Bozo was franchised out. He was on TV in Boston, Detroit area, Chicago, and other cities. And famous weatherman Willard Scott, who was the weatherman on the Today Show for many years on NBC, played Bozo on WRC TV in Washington from 1959 to 1962.
Wow. All right. Longer
so there
than
you
thought.
go.
That's very cool. Again, this day in history, that show premiered, a cultural icon for at least a couple of generations, and that was a long time ago. Check it out. If you'd like to see more of any of the headlines we've mentioned here, I've linked to them all each day on our Facebook page, and we'll be back. An update from the Utah legislative leadership happening as we speak. It should be wrapping up soon, at which point we'll be able to bring you the highlights. That's coming up in a few minutes here on KVN News for the People.
This is Dr. Red, chiropractic physician with Red River Health and Wellness. Have you been suffering and you can't find any answers?
I actually suffer from depression and anxiety. I also have had severe IBS problems. I actually had gone into a different doctor of mine because I thought maybe I was starting to go through menopause and had problems sleeping, and I wasn't resting well, and just everything felt wrong.
Red River Health and Wellness can help.
I am now back at work. It's easy. I get through things effortlessly at work, and it's been a life-changing for me. I'm sleeping better at night. I have full energy all day. I don't have those slumps where I need a nap. It's been amazing. It's been a good journey for me.
Our goal is to teach you and educate you so you know how to manage your condition a lot more effectively, and you know what to do and what not to do for the rest of your life.
Schedule your appointment today at 855-55-RIVER. Red River Health and Wellness with offices in Logan, South Jordan, Springville, and St. George.
Call Red River today.
On the battlefield, there's a saying America's military men and women live by. Never leave a fallen warrior behind, ever. Off the battlefield, Wounded Warrior Project operates with the same goal. Wounded Warrior Project was created to help our men and women returning home with the scars of war, whether those scars are physical or mental. Wounded Warrior Project. We never leave a fallen warrior behind, ever. Learn more about what we do at woundedwarriorproject.org.
I think it's just vapor.
Vaping is safer than smoking, isn't it?
There's really not even that much nicotine in them, right?
One vape pod has as much nicotine as one pack of cigarettes.
My kid
knows it's dangerous.
5.4 million American kids vape, and most think it's harmless. Get your head out of the cloud. Talk to your kid about vaping. Visit talkaboutvaping.org. That's talkaboutvaping.org. Brought to you by the American Lung Association and the Ad Council.
All right, they're done, finally. The legislature, leadership, hosting their traditional pre-legislative session priorities press conference. The reason this is kind of important is when leadership says it's a priority, that's a signal. Not only is it a way to inform the public what's going to be most important for them to spend time on, in their opinion, this legislative session as it kicks off here in about 10 days, but it also signals to the rest of the legislature, which is the real reason this happens, that these priorities will pass. This is leadership saying to the rest of their majority caucuses in the House and the Senate, these are not negotiable. Well, they're debatable. We can debate them, we can tweak them, we can change them around. That's what the whole legislative process is about. But we are going to be spending time on these issues, and the expectation is something will pass. And if you want to make leadership angry by doing otherwise, we dare you. And that's basically what's just taken place. It kicked off at about 5 o'clock, and it just wrapped up. And here's, for those who follow the legislature loosely, if you want to know what big issues are going to be prioritized and get a lot of attention and time from the group of legislators that will convene in a bit for the legislative session, 45-day session, here's the list. Great Salt Lake, no surprise, top of the list. Legislative leadership, specifically getting its first mention from majority, let me get his title right, not whip. Oh, just majority leader. They changed the names. Majority leader Mike Schultz, Representative Mike Schultz, a Republican from, I believe, the Davis County area, in the House, led the discussion today, and he said the Great Salt Lake is the top priority. There was a report published just last night. It was a joint effort of research done by the University of Utah and BYU working together to compile previous research and new research. And the report basically said the window of time to save the lake is much smaller than anticipated. In fact, the report specifically says we've got about 5 years before the ecology of the lake is so damaged it would not be something we can rescue. Even if we brought the water levels up by then, if it's not up a lot sooner than then, it's too late for most of the ecology of the lake. So it would be forever changed, and how, we don't know. So the goal is to do much more than we have been doing already, which is a lot, on a more rapid pace. And Schultz said that's going to, of course, require money, and they're going to have to do some aggressive incentivizing of many things, especially water conservation, which then led the discussion to agriculture. I wondered, as I watched some of the video, why Cache Valley's Representative Casey Snyder was there at the press conference. He's usually not one for the spotlight, but he was invited, as I understand it, to weigh in on this specifically. And Representative Snyder, from the south end of Cache Valley, where his district is, said, when we talk about those, I'm paraphrasing here, he said, when we talk about those incentives to conserve water, to save the lake, again with this report last night, just ahead of this planned press conference, saying we've got less time than anticipated to save the lake before it's too far gone, ecology-wise. Representative Snyder said, when we talk about those incentives, we need to be talking about agriculture. He said saving the Great Salt Lake is important, and it's for everyone, but everyone needs to play a part, and that includes the legislature when they talk about these incentives. Let me put this a different way. We've talked a lot for a couple of years now of drought. When it comes to legislative discussions, we've talked a lot about grants for lawn replacements, grants for water development, and even removal of development. We've talked about grants that will encourage businesses to adopt more water-wise internally and externally at their locations throughout the state. This is all money well spent, but Representative Snyder is kind of hitting a nail on the head here. If you want to be realistic about water conservation, reducing the amount of water that is used before it can even get to the Great Salt Lake, we need to be incentivizing change in agriculture. And we haven't really done that. Snyder didn't say this, I'm saying it. We haven't really done that as aggressively as we probably could, especially in a year of surpluses and excess revenue the state didn't expect to have in the first place. I think that Snyder is right. Representative Snyder saying we've got to focus on agriculture. 80% roughly of our water use each and every year goes to agriculture. We can talk about things like maybe we shouldn't be growing so much alfalfa, maybe we should be using fields differently, maybe we should. Those discussions are important, but from a legislative perspective, the biggest and quickest thing they can do is spend money. And if they do that in the right way, create the right incentives, they can make some real change. So Snyder endorsing the idea, saying, we've got, when we talk about incentives, we've got to talk about agriculture, ways that could play out. This is me guessing. Specifics weren't mentioned today, but we discussed it last week on the show, in fact. But the state could throw a lot of money at grants and tax rebates and various other things that would encourage adoption of new agricultural technology, specifically when it comes to watering the crops. There could also be some money spent on, rebuilding some of the waterways and water systems where there's a lot of leakage and seepage. That creates another problem where you're at that point dumping less water. You're leaking less water into the ground. If you shore up a canal here or there, which can affect underwater water tables. So this is complex, and it's going to require the work of scientists as well being involved in this. But Snyder is right. It's if we're going to get serious about this statewide, and especially when it comes to the Great Salt Lake, the fact that we've spent 2 years now without getting serious about doing something when it comes to water use for agriculture, other than saying they should use less, really? Everyone knew that. What are their options? Well, the state may be able to give them some. So thankful to Representative Snyder for being very blunt about that today during the press conference. If you want to watch this, by the way, the full event, as it were, is available or will be available once the archive is posted. It's streamed live on le.utah.gov, the legislative website. But the archive, it usually takes about an hour, and it's up there. It's something you can rewatch and re-listen to if you want audio only. So education was the number 2 priority listed by legislative leaders today as a must-do for the legislative session. Majority Leader Mike Schultz, again, Republican lawmaker, said that they will be looking at a school voucher bill. This is a thorn in the side of Utah County lawmakers alone. That voters since 2007 have repeatedly said no to a voucher bill. And the reason why is no mystery at all. Most of the state is not Utah County. Most of the state is rural. And a voucher bill would take money from education without any benefit to most rural communities. So it's not popular. But there are a handful of lawmakers in Utah County who are, in some cases, literally married into families that make a lot of money off of private schools, and they won't give it up. And so it's coming back again. But Schultz did say that, or at least hinted, that this threat earlier that raises for teachers proposed by the governor in his budget in December, the threat was they would tie that to a school voucher bill, daring teachers basically to come out against school vouchers as they traditionally do. Being the experts in education, they know what they're talking about. But if their raises are on the line, they might not come out in such a full force. Schultz hinted today that they've scrapped that idea because, frankly, it would have been too obvious. And I'm guessing the majority of teachers probably still would have said, we'll wait a year for a raise. Thank you. Schultz did say the voucher bill will be back, and Fox 13's Ben Winslow also reached out to Governor Cox to ask what he thought about it. Cox had said previously if the legislature passes it, he'd support it. But he tacked on his own qualifier saying school voucher bill only makes sense if schools are already fully funded, including salaries that are more competitive to finally stave off Utah's 5 years in a row now teacher shortage and mass exodus, high turnover in schools here in Utah due to low pay. Finally, transportation was on the priorities list. One thing the legislature is talking about, or has been talking about, is making all public transit in Utah free fare. Cache Valley Transit District, the Summit County Transit District have done free fare for a long time now, and they've proven that it can work at minimum taxpayer expense, especially when you look at the whole picture and the trade-off taxpayers are getting for a functioning public transit system. The car's taken off the road. I'd like to see more of that here in Cache Valley still, but we've got a ways to go. Either way, there's been pressure on the legislature to consider this for UTA statewide. A lot of research and evidence showing that it does, no-brainer here, it does increase ridership. But, of course, that means the costs go up when the fares go away. And Schultz said today that is likely not to happen in this legislative session. Governor Cox, though, has said he is going to push the legislature to expand free fare. There's a free fare month that happens every year, and the governor said he is not going to be backing down on his push for the legislature to expand free fare in some way. So likely not going to be a full-on free fare forever kind of thing, Schultz saying, but the governor saying he's not backing down from the legislature, finding the money to make it more than a month so that they can really give it a good test, see what happens. At this point, for some reason, they ended up back on vouchers, doubling back to that topic, and House Republican leaders just felt the need to announce en masse together that they were supportive of it. That was because during the conversation there were a few Republicans who said they weren't supportive, and one who said he was, who's likely going to be the sponsor from Utah County, Jefferson Moss. Moss, I think, felt slighted by that, so he was given some time to come back to the microphone a second time and say, that, hey, we're making record investments in public education. So trying to say basically, okay, we might not be paying teachers enough to keep them. We might not be funding schools enough as much as we should, but we've made some record investments. We've making the argument that they've shown good faith, basically trying to say, pretty please, can't we do this voucher bill? Again, this is just a weird one to me. It's repeatedly not popular throughout the statewide ballot initiatives that have been tried. Lawmakers got an earful just last session when they tried to kind of sneak a voucher bill in. And again, the strangest thing is this is 4 lawmakers from Utah County that won't let this one go. I just makes no sense to me. But and finally, taxes. This was the big question. There have been lots of hints about potential tax cuts or even changes to tax structure permanently. And the big announcement today, no real surprise, but it was made official today that the House GOP caucus unanimously supported using at least some of the surplus revenue, the revenue the state didn't expect to have to spend, that they now have or will have when the budget officially kicks in July 1st. Remember, they're always crafting budgets ahead, so they're working with projections here, not actual money. But the projected surplus, the House GOP caucus was pulled, and there was unanimous support for using at least some of that surplus revenue for a tax cut of some kind. So that is officially going to happen. What, though, is still a big question. On the table, potential removal of sales tax on food, potential additional income tax, which gets a lot of criticism because they usually it's pretty top heavy. It goes to higher earners traditionally. The final answer was basically all options are on the table. So they have not decided which tax cut or even surveyed to see which tax cuts are most popular. But I would guess in the end we'll get some sort of income tax reduction. If I had to guess, how low can they go? That's also a big question. Governor Cox, in his budget, said that, that they have the money to do up to $1 billion in income tax cutting. We'll see if that, but there are some larger numbers going around as well. So there you have it, an update on the legislative press conference happened today. One final note on some of the social issues bills. There is a bill, for example, that proposes ignoring the medical profession and doctors and banning certain medical procedures that are currently trendy political hot-button issues. Those bills, Schultz said, are sure to come up, but he said with an audible eye roll, we'll give them a proper fair vetting, implying that the legislature doesn't have a lot of appetite this year for those hot-button national political issues that have unfortunately become more common in the legislature here in Utah the last few years. So hopefully that's Schultz signaling that they're going to kill a lot of those in committee. People are free to campaign, but don't campaign for your political aspirations with the taxpayer's dime, which is basically what bringing these bills up in a state legislative session amounts to. Yeah. Now, you know who you are. Luckily, none of these lawmakers are from Cache Valley. We'll be back right after these headlines with KVNU's Bill Walter.
Thank you, Jason. KVNU News Time is 5:41, and the news is brought to you by Logan Dental Associates. The 28-year-old alleged killer of 4 University of Idaho students in November has made his first court appearance in Idaho. ABC's Alex Stone has more.
Murder in the first degree.
Laying out the charges against him of murder and burglary, the judge advised Brian Kohberger of the potential sentence of the death penalty.
The maximum penalty for this offense, if he were to plead guilty or be found guilty, is death or imprisonment for life.
Without showing any emotion, Kohberger told the judge he understood the potential penalty. He sat in a jail uniform with prisoner written on the back, telling the court he understood his rights. He's due back in court in a week. Alex Stone, ABC News.
Meanwhile, the DNA of the man accused of killing the 4 students was found on a knife sheath recovered at the crime scene, and cell phone data shows that Kohberger was in the area of the victim's home multiple times in the months before the November attack. That's what an investigator said in court documents unsealed today. The documents also detail a surviving roommate's chilling encounter with a masked intruder the night of the stabbings, but the documents still leave many questions unanswered, including whether Kohberger and the victims knew each other and why police were not called to the home until nearly 8 hours after the killings occurred. Alta High School was evacuated Wednesday afternoon as a precaution after district officials said a suspicious bag was reported. However, an investigation later determined the bag did not contain any explosive device. Students and faculty were evacuated at 1:30 p.m. Sandy Police Sergeant Greg Moffitt said a former student left behind a bag about an hour earlier because the student was not supposed to be on campus. Moffitt said the bag was concerning and prompted the evacuation. The bomb squad was also called to the scene, and investigators remained at the school for hours. It was unknown what was inside the bag. And more than 48 hours after a plane crashed at Provo Airport, killing 1 person and prompting an investigation, the airport reopened Wednesday afternoon at 4. The plane crashed Monday shortly after 11:30 a.m. on the main runway of the airport. There was no damage to the runway during the crash, but the airport was closed as it has only 1 runway. Officials later identified the man who died as the pilot of the aircraft, 62-year-old Nathan Ricks of Alpine. Ricks was a retired executive of Provo-based company Nu Skin. In addition, 3 other passengers in the plane suffered various injuries. 1 person was taken to the hospital in critical condition. 2 others walked away from the crash with minor injuries. The cause of the crash is under investigation by the Federal Aviation Administration and the National Transportation Safety Board. KVNU News Time is 5:44.
My name is Dr. Brandon Prevey, and I love being a dentist.
I work with Drs. Curtis Taylor, Anthony Larson, and Paul Harris. When people ask where our office is, I actually have two answers. First, I spend part of the week at Logan Dental Associates, and then second, I spend the other part at Cherry Creek Dental in Richmond. Both locations are a full-service dental office and can take care of everyone in the family. Call or go online and make your appointment with the offices most convenient for you. Logan Dental Associates in Logan or Cherry Creek Dental in Richmond.
KBNU weather for tonight, cloudy with snow in the forecast, up to 2 inches accumulation, low in the upper 20s, and then snow likely in the morning. A chance of snow in the afternoon, about an inch accumulation tomorrow, high in the upper 30s. Partly sunny on Saturday, high in the upper 30s. 31 has been our high. It's 29 right now. And there is a winter storm warning in effect from now until 2 p.m. Friday for the mountains of northern Utah. For more details on these and other stories, visit CashValleyDaily.com.
Own a small business or a farm? You thought about solar? Listen up. A new USDA grant was announced allocating $300 million for farmers and small business owners to put in solar. That's right. The government will help you get solar installed, covering 40% of the cost. And don't forget, as a business, you can save up to 50 or 60% more with federal and state tax credits. Second Sun Solar will install your system and help with the USDA paperwork. Call Second Sun Solar today at 435-363-9917 or online at utahsolardirect.com.
This is the Green Canyon High School Sports Report for last week. The boys basketball team had a great win against Park City before the Christmas break, 64-37. They limited Park City to single-digit scoring in the second and fourth quarters. Meanwhile, the Lady Wolves also ended the year with a win against Preston. The Lady Wolves wrestled at Ben Lomond High School at the Lady Scott Invitational on Thursday, taking first and third places. The Green Canyon High School Sports Report is brought to you by Sadler Construction and other Booster Club Alpha members.
Welcome back to KVN News for the People. Landlines, we're going to be talking about them in a second here. This is interesting. You may not be able to get one soon. We'll talk about why. Story in the Salt Lake Tribune today. And Utah could be one of the first hit by this. First, though, we have a very patient Mitch called just before I went to the news there, wanted to weigh in on the legislative press briefing that happened at 5 o'clock today. During that briefing, they listed a whole slew of priorities, one of them being a tax cut. They have a lot of revenue they didn't expect to have, a surplus. And the governor in his budget, now legislative leaders making it official today, saying at least some of that money is going to a tax cut. Might be a reduction of or elimination of sales tax on food. It might be an income tax cut. It could be a lot of things in between those two. They didn't say what their preference was, but they said that they polled the caucus unanimously. The response was yes, something. So there will be at least some tax cut. Now, in previous years, that's been a smaller tax cut that went to certain individuals, like a tax cut for those on Social Security, at least as far as the state is concerned. There was also a previous tax cut for veterans that took about $100 million out of the state's anticipated annual revenue. So it could be something small like that. I think it'll be a little larger. But Mitch on the line wanted to weigh in. Mitch, your thoughts on a potential tax cut?
Yeah, we know which one they want. They want their income tax because they get something from it. I mean, I'm loving that $7 I got in state tax cut for income tax last time they did a statewide one.
Yeah, it's
a joke.
This actually reminds me of something, Mitch. Something I'm kind of critical of the media for here in Utah, and I'm guilty of it too. But a lot of times when we talk about this, we talk about the total dollar amount. Back to the one a few years ago for veterans, it was announced by the Senate president, we just passed a $100 million tax cut, and that's a great headline for the Senate president, right? But if you did the math, it was basically like 57 cents for each veteran in Utah. Which is something, right? But I'm exaggerating.
Yeah.
It wasn't that small, but it was not a lot for each individual veteran in the end. So they get. It's worth pointing out how this breaks down for each individual or individual family. Sure.
Yeah, and the voucher one, every state that's ever done a voucher program like that, it's actually ruined public education there.
Yeah.
Every single time.
Arizona currently desperately
Indiana?
trying to claw theirs back, trying to undo their voucher program. Yeah. It definitely seems to hollow out the public education and not go so well on the private education part.
And it never benefits the people that need help with education. It doesn't benefit low-income people.
Sure.
Because they still can't afford to go to a private school.
Yeah, I think
the voucher's never enough to pay for a low-income person. That's on purpose, by the way.
That's why it boggles me that this handful of Utah County lawmakers are able to insert this into the legislative session so repeatedly for the last
How do they keep getting reelected on
basically 15 years. They get reelected on it because their diehard constituents are fans ideologically of privatizing the education system. But the reality is that Utah's a very rural state, and wages in Utah, whether we want to admit it or not, are low in contrast with some other states. And so it's in Utah, it's sort of a reality that may change one day. But as Mitch just said, vouchers aren't popular in Utah, and that's been proven again and again and again in legislative discussions, ballot initiatives, phones ringing off the wall, and angry emails to lawmakers when they've tried to do this repeatedly for that simple reason. As Mitch said, the majority of Utahns, whether this is a thing in Utah or not, can't afford a private school. So their kids are going to be going to a public school, and they would rather not hollow out those public schools. And that's just the reality. I don't care where you sit ideologically. You can think a privatized education system is the way to go all you want. It does not change the reality that right now, here in Utah, the majority of families, especially in rural areas, if they even have a private school option nearby that's realistic, they can't afford it. And a voucher program isn't going to be robust enough to offset that. So I don't know why it keeps coming up, but Mitch, I'm with you, and I'm guessing this is going to play out exactly the same way it has 10 times over in the last 15 years. But they're bringing it up again. That was announced today. So hold tight. Mitch, thanks for the call. Others, if you'd like to weigh in, 753-5868. We'll be back right after this.
On the next Handle on the Law.
We're cohabiting, boyfriend and girlfriend.
All right, part of it, he gives you X number of dollars. Okay, you want to call it rent?
Is there a percentage for cost of living over a couple of years?
You can increase it, I think, under state law, 10%. You're cohabiting, you're living together, and you go, by the way, it's 10%. You want to do that in the middle of a romantic interlude.
Saturday afternoons from 1 to 4 on News Talk KVNU, 610 AM and 102 FM, the voice of Northern Utah.
Looking for ways to serve but don't know where to begin? Go to justserve.org, a free site to help those who want to serve find opportunities nearby. Just Serve has teamed up with organizations nationwide. Go to justserve.org and type in your city, and you'll see a list of service opportunities. Sign up on Just Serve to receive emails letting you know about new projects. Just Serve is fast, free, and easy. JustServe.org is provided as a service by The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
There's a lot going on right now, and broadcasters are on the ground covering all of it, bringing you the weather, the traffic, and breaking news, all while entertaining you 24 hours a day. Someone needs to tell you what's going on around the world and in our hometowns. And that someone is us. We are free radio. We are always there. We are broadcasters. Visit wearebroadcasters.com or text radio to 52886 to learn more. Furnished by NAB and this station.
Welcome back to KVN News for the People. Wrapping up today with a story. I don't know. I've thought about this a lot, Bill, since I read it earlier today on what this could potentially mean, or how it might affect people, and maybe the effect would be not much of anything. But Lumen Technologies. This is Bill and I were just talking about this during the break. So my mom, never stopped calling CenturyLink Quest. It was just that was how she knew him. But CenturyLink bought Quest. Now this is different from Singular, who bought AT&T and then sold them, and then that's cell phone. This is landlines. So CenturyLink then absorbed, when they bought Quest, absorbed them into this broader company, and CenturyLink has now become Lumen Technologies. Although your bill is probably saying CenturyLink here in Utah, Lumen Technologies is the official company, and I'm not sure, but I feel like Lumen Technologies has an AT&T tie there. Anyway, so this is coming from Lumen Technologies. The Utah angle on this is that they are CenturyLink, providing all of the landlines here in the state, and still a lot of DSL users for those who can't get other types of broadband. DSL is still an option from CenturyLink, and is still widely used in especially in a lot of more rural areas of the state. So a lot of people potentially affected by this. But Lumen Technologies has officially filed a petition with the state of Utah to undo their designation as a, quote, carrier of last resort. Some complicated history here. This actually started as a federal thing, and it started with trains. There was a debate a long time ago about whether or not trains had to let anybody on, and the federal government, when trains were the primary mode of transportation for a lot of workers, said, look, you can't let people... Train operators were letting people on if they were willing to pay a little extra. They'd get priority, and then the train would be full, and those who couldn't afford to pay extra didn't get a ride to work. The federal government stepped in and said, look, you are what's known as a common carrier. So unless someone's committing a crime or violating a clearly announced and posted conduct rule or clothing rule, sure, if you want to say people can't come on naked, we're fine with that. But you can't charge people different things to get on to make more money. You have to let everyone on because you are a common carrier. You're an important part of commerce. Eventually, it was necessary to designate the same thing for telephones. Businesses couldn't operate it without a telephone. And so the common carrier status was applied federally to telephone services.
Public utility. Right?
Yeah, it's a public utility, basically. So acknowledging the fact that it's impossible for commerce or personal lives to operate without one, phone company providers were forced by this carrier status to offer it to anyone who could afford it. Not charge extra to those who could afford it, driving out those who couldn't. If someone could afford the flat rate, you had to offer it to them, unless they broke the law or some other, clearly marked and published terms of service, like using the service in a way that the company has said they don't allow. You could block them then, but you can't just block them because they, couldn't pay a little extra that you're asking for. So that was the common carrier status. In states, this became known as carrier of last resort, a nicer way to say the same thing. And Utah has one of those, which basically requires a company to offer a service to anyone in the state if that is designated by the state to be so key to commerce or safety or our personal lives that everyone should have at least the option to buy one. So Lumen Technologies has officially filed a petition with the state as of this week to have that status removed. The status requiring that they offer a landline to anyone who lives in the state of Utah. If granted, they would be able to shut down landlines at will. Basically, you just get a letter, I'm guessing, from Lumen or CenturyLink that just says, hey, we no longer offer landlines in your neighborhood. Sorry. The company says the reason for their petition is it now has 1/7 of the Utah landline customers it had just 13 years ago. 13 years ago, they had about 831,000 landline customers. At the end of 2021 and halfway through 2022, they had less than 100,000, and it's dipped since then already. So cell phones, of course, the reason for this widespread use and adoption starting way back in the 90s has eventually cut into the landline market so much. Lumen Technology is basically petitioning the state saying, we're still going to offer them, but it makes no more sense for us to have to offer them to everyone. So we would like permission to, well, say no. We're not offering landlines in your neighborhood anymore. Where this might be, they don't say, but the petition has officially been filed, so something to keep an eye on, maybe, for everyone if you still use those landlines. That's our show for today. Appreciate everyone tuning in. We'll be back tomorrow with a new episode of The Movie Show.